The morning light once slipped through a narrow Harlem window and landed on a boy tapping rhythm on a kitchen table, keeping time with two worn spoons as if the world were already listening. Outside, the street was waking up. The rumble of trucks, the shuffle of shoes, the soft rise of voices drifting through open stairwell doors. No one knew that a sound from this block, from this child, would one day bend the arc of American music. Long before his name meant anything, that voice carried something older than his years, something shaped by gospel harmonies and the weight of small responsibilities. People said it was a gift. Others said it was a warning, because a gift that bright can draw both applause and shadows. In the years that followed, the world would call him a star, a pioneer, a miracle of timing. They would dance to the record that lifted him into history, a song that asked why people fall in love and became an anthem long before he understood the question himself. But behind that rise was a different story, quieter and harder. And it leads us to the question that lingers even now. How does a boy climb so high so fast? And why did the world not catch him when he fell? He was born into a small Harlem apartment where voices meant more than possessions, and music softened what life could not. His mother worked long days in other people's homes, carrying the scent of starch and soap on her clothes. His father drove a truck, humming gospel melodies under his breath as if rhythm were a kind of prayer. In that household, songs floated through the air the way hope floats, quietly, stubbornly, even on the hardest mornings. Frankie grew up watching grown people shoulder grown burdens. When his parents separated, the air in the home changed, and so did his role in it. At 10, while other boys played marbles in the street, he stood behind a grocery counter ringing up customers, his small hands moving with a discipline far older than he was. The job wasn't just a job. It was a promise to help keep the lights on, to cover the rent, to make sure the family could stay where they were. But music stayed close to him, closer than anything else. After school, he and his brothers would gather on the corner, their voices layered against the hum of the city. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They were just trying to feel a little lighter. Harlem was full of groups like that. Young singers practicing in hallways, stairwells, and rooftops, letting echoes teach them what formal lessons could not. That's how he fell in with the boys who called themselves the Coups de Villes, later the Ermines. Their harmonies were raw but earnest, stitched together from hallway rehearsals and borrowed records. Frankie followed them like a shadow, studying every note, every breath, every shift in their blend. He wanted to be inside the sound, not standing outside of it. They kept practicing the same song so often that a neighbor finally handed them a stack of old love letters, telling them to make something of their own. Buried among the fading paper was a line, a simple poem about birds singing in the morning. No one knew then that those words would one day become a question the whole world could sing. Frankie's chance arrived the night an A&R man, Richard Barrett, heard their voices drifting through the building. The boys had hoped for that moment. They sang harder, cleaner, pouring years of hallway rehearsals into a few precious seconds. Barrett listened, nodded, and told them they had something worth shaping. But it was the audition with George Goldner that changed everything. Frankie stood in the background at first, just another small voice in a crowded harmony. Then Goldner asked what the little one could do. When Frankie stepped forward, the room shifted. His tone impossibly young yet impossibly sure. His presence quiet but undeniable. It wasn't just talent. It was inevitability. By the end of that night, the group had a future and Frankie had a destiny. None of them knew how high it would lift him or how far he might fall. But the doorway had opened, and his voice was already moving through it. The song began as a quiet line on a faded piece of paper, a poem someone once wrote for a girl who never wrote back. But in the studio, under the glow of harsh white lights and the restless pacing of producers, that line became something else. Frankie shaped the tempo, lifted the melody, and turned a slow confession into a bright question the world could dance to. 26 takes later, the room finally stilled, because everyone sensed they had captured lightning. When Why Do Fools Fall in Love hit the airwaves, it didn't just rise. It erupted. Radios from Harlem to London carried that voice, thin but fearless, the kind that slipped under locked doors and into the hearts of anyone who still remembered being young. School children heard it before they saw him. Some even thought the singer was a girl, a strange compliment in its own way, proof of how unusual his sound truly was. The fame came faster than anyone expected. One week they were practicing harmonies beneath a street lamp. The next, they were wearing matching suits under studio lights while crowds screamed their names. The teenagers moved like a single heartbeat, and Frankie stood at the front, the smallest body holding the largest expectation. TV shows followed. Tours multiplied. Promoters called from every corner of the country. The world acted as if it had been waiting for this group, this sound, this boy. But behind the applause was another America, one that did not cheer as easily. On tours through the South, white groups slept in hotels with lobbies and chandeliers. Black musicians slept in buildings that barely counted as motels. Their bus drivers fetched their meals because they weren't allowed inside the restaurants. Outside some venues, angry faces held signs warning that their music and their hair were a threat to white youth. And still, the kids, black and white, pushed past the fear because the music felt like freedom. Then came the night that changed television history. While performing Little Bitty Pretty One, Frankie reached for the hand of a white girl on the dance floor. It lasted seconds, but the moment broke an unwritten rule. A black teenager dancing with a white girl on national TV, in a country still raw from the murder of Emmett Till, was more than scandal. It was a collision of fear, courage, and innocence. The show was canceled soon after, but the moment never left the nation's memory. Despite the backlash, the influence of Frankie Lymon kept growing. Artists who would one day define entire eras watched him closely. Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder. Even Berry Gordy shaped the early sound of the Jackson 5 around the energy Frankie and the teenagers created. For a boy barely old enough to sign his own contracts, the weight of that impact was almost unimaginable. This was his peak, shimmering, unstoppable, and already beginning to crack at the edges. Because fame this bright rarely burns for long, especially when the world demands more than any child can give. The cracks began quietly, the way small fractures appear in glass long before it shatters. Success had placed Frankie at the center of every room, yet it also pushed him further from the people who once sang beside him under hallway lights. Management saw him as the headline, not as a boy inside a group, and they built a future around his name alone. The teenagers felt the shift immediately, and the trust between them thinned until the music could no longer hold it together. Money should have been a safety net, but the system was never built for boys like him. Contracts were written in rooms he was too young to enter, filled with promises he was too naive to question. The trust fund that was supposed to secure his adulthood shrank into a few forgotten bills. And the publishing he helped create, the crown jewel of any artist's future, was maneuvered into other hands long before he understood what he had lost. Then came the loneliness that follows fame when the crowd goes home. Touring without the teenagers felt like walking without balance, and his voice, once bright and bell-clear, began to deepen as he grew older. Audiences who loved the boy weren't sure what to make of the young man. Clubs paid less. Labels grew impatient. The spotlight that once lifted him now felt like it was fading faster than he could chase it. Heroin arrived the way danger often does, disguised as comfort, offered by someone older, whispered as something harmless. He tried it to keep pace with musicians twice his age, never imagining the needle would become a door he couldn't close. At first he resisted, slipping in and out of the habit. But grief, exhaustion, and the ache of feeling left behind pulled him deeper each time. When his mother died, the world seemed to tilt, and he reached again for the only thing that numbed the fall. His life became a rotation of attempts. Rehab, recovery, relapse, regret. He married, lost a child, drifted through labels, and signed contracts that evaporated as quickly as they appeared. He sold his publishing for a sum so small it broke the hearts of those who learned about it later. And the one man who collected those rights, the one who owned nearly every door Frankie tried to re-enter, no longer needed him once the papers were signed. The arrests came next. Petty theft, possession, the desperate acts of someone trying to outrun withdrawal. A judge sent him to the military instead of prison, and for a moment it seemed like a clean slate. In Georgia, he stayed sober, went to church, and tried performing again on weekends. But discipline and longing don't always share the same road. When he went AWOL, the fragile structure holding him together gave way. By the mid-1960s, he was still young, still gifted, still reaching. But the world had moved on, and the music industry had already taken what it valued most from him. He tried to climb back, through new singles, new managers, new promises. Yet each attempt felt like lifting a weight that time had welded to the floor. A boy once carried by a global hit was now carrying the full weight of his own unfinished story. And he was running out of places to set it down. In America, Frankie Lymon lived inside a contradiction. Adored by the nation's youth, yet constrained by the rules adults refused to change. Teenagers heard only the music. The way his voice leapt into the air, the way his phrasing made joy feel reachable. But the country around him heard something else. Some feared his influence, feared the mixing of black and white audiences, feared the sight of a boy whose talent crossed the boundaries they tried so hard to enforce. Abroad, the story shifted. In the United Kingdom, Why Do Fools Fall in Love rose to #1, lifted by listeners who cared more about rhythm than race. European crowds welcomed him with a warmth that didn't carry the same political weight as back home. There, Frankie Lymon was not a threat to the social order. He was simply a star. The distance softened the judgment, letting the music breathe more freely than it often could in the States. Yet America was also the place that later tried to make sense of what had happened to him. Reporters revisited the early records. Lawyers pulled old contracts from drawers. Historians traced how the industry had devoured young black talent long before the public knew their names. His story became part of a larger conversation, one about exploitation, ownership, and the price of entering an industry that rarely protected the people it relied on most. When Diana Ross revived Why Do Fools Fall in Love decades later, the song returned like an echo from another lifetime. The lawsuit that followed exposed just how tangled his legacy had become. Marriages disputed, royalties buried, publishing rights traded in rooms where Frankie Lymon never stood. To older American audiences, this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a reminder of how often black artists shaped the nation's culture while receiving little protection from the systems built around them. Globally, his legacy settled into something softer. Remembered as the bright spark of early rock and roll, a teenager whose voice helped shift the world's sense of what popular music could be. But in the United States, the story carried more weight. It held triumph and tragedy in equal measure, asking the country to reckon with what it celebrates and what it destroys. And within that contrast, between the applause abroad and the unfinished mourning at home, the true shape of his legacy began to emerge. In the end, his story reads like a long note held past its measure. Beautiful, trembling, and gone too soon. Frankie Lymon arrived in the world with a voice that seemed borrowed from some place untouched by age or sorrow. But the life around that voice was fragile, shaped by a childhood spent working, a stardom born too early, and an industry that took more than it returned. His fall was not the failure of a single boy. It was the failure of a system that never learned how to protect the children it placed on stage. Yet what remains is not the collapse but the echo. You can still hear it in the bright lift of a Motown hook, in the cadence of a Jackson 5 melody, in the innocence that threads through early rock and roll. His influence lingers the way smoke lingers after a match is struck. Faint but undeniable, a reminder that light once lived there. And the song that carried him into history, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, has outlasted every contract, every courtroom, every shadow that trailed him. The years after his passing brought their own reckonings. Awards, inductions, documentaries, all attempts to recognize what wasn't fully seen while he was still here. A name carved into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A star placed on a Hollywood sidewalk. These gestures do not rewrite the past, but they honor the truth that his voice changed the shape of American music long before the country understood it. Sometimes, the smallest graves hold the largest stories. For decades, his rested without a proper headstone, as if the world couldn't quite decide how to mark a life that had burned so brightly and disappeared so quickly. But even without stone, his legacy endured. It lived in the memories of those who heard him first, and in the artists who followed unwittingly in his footsteps. If you've ever wondered how a single voice can shift the world, look here. If his story reminds you of someone who rose too fast or carried too much, feel free to share their name below. Stories survive when they are spoken aloud. And if you'd like to walk with us through more lives that shaped our culture, you're welcome to stay, to listen, and to join us again. Because the music didn't end with